Fat boy! Fat!
Some liberals just can't help themselves and have to protest Trump in the most cringeworthy and eye-roll-inducing ways imaginable. We're going to break down a couple viral moments from the No Kings protests, protesting against President Trump over the weekend, and so much more on today's episode of the Brad vs. Everyone podcast, my daily show where we take on the craziest ideas from across our media, our politics, and the internet, all from an independent perspective. Before we get into our other topics, I do want to say my heart goes out to the family and the victims of the political violence in Minnesota targeting 2 Democratic lawmakers and their families. I did speak about it on my bonus channel and on television over the weekend. I'm so horrified by it. That kind of thing has no place in America, and we'll talk about it more later in the show, but I did just want to say that first and foremost. Now, like I mentioned, we're going to talk about the massive No Kings protests that took place across the country and actually had millions of people turn out in what were largely, almost exclusively, except for 1 or 2 instances, peaceful protests with people exercising their First Amendment rights. We also saw pretty good attendance numbers, with USA Today reporting that organizers estimate about 5 million in attendance. And even if that's an overestimate, still getting millions of people out to protest something is a significant accomplishment. And I did appreciate the fact that these protests were almost exclusively peaceful. I saw a lot of pro-America, pro-American flag displays from some of it. And I definitely appreciate that when we've had violent riots. And even if I don't agree with some of the tactics and rhetoric of the people participating in these protests, I did want to give them a little bit of credit on that front. Now we have to talk about the parts of these protests that got very cringe very quickly. For example, liberals are cosplaying the Handmaid's Tale again. Here's a clip from one of these protests in Texas where dozens of women walk down the street in full Handmaid's Tale garb, suggesting that in modern-day America, women are now akin to the literal sex slaves in the dystopian novel and TV series, The Handmaid's Tale. Take a look at this clip. I am just begging y'all to read a single different book. Seriously, this just does not hit the way that they think it hits. Some of these resistance liberal wine moms really think that doing their big one and getting in their Little Red Riding Hood garb and cosplaying the Handmaid's Tale in the streets somehow comes across as some sort of stunning and brave resistance message. It doesn't. I'm sorry. I'm somebody who is totally open to criticisms of Trump, who is not far right by any means, but this kind of thing comes across as incredibly, incredibly cringe, alarmist, and hysterical. The Dallas Morning News reported more on this, saying dozens of women dressed in the signature red cloaks worn by handmaids in The Handmaid's Tale marched through downtown. Protesters cheered and clapped for the women. It's the ultimate symbol of oppression, and that's what's happening right now. Sabrina Ball, 47, of Fort Worth, who helped organize the Handmaid's March, said, "If we don't act now, we will lose our country." Well, Sabrina, these kinds of protests are where you lose most normal people in America, who might agree with you that some of the pro-life laws in different red states are very poorly written or are going too far and causing problems for women, who might agree with you about some of your criticisms of the Trump administration, but any unironic suggestion that anything happening in America today where some of his top cabinet officials are women is akin to a dystopian television show where women are literally forced to be reproductive sex slaves, where gay people are shot up against and hung up against the wall, whereas Trump is appointing the highest ever ranking gay official to the federal government. It all just sounds absurd and delusional and hysterical. It comes off like y'all just want to be victims too bad. You just have to take things too far. And I guess, do you just not care that this isn't going to be perceived well by most normal Americans? I mean, I thought the point of a protest was to convince people, but at least with these kinds of antics, all you do is alienate people from any legitimate criticisms you might have by being so incredibly cringeworthy. And again, it's the same when people constantly bring up Hitler. Can you just like read a different book? Like a single other book, please. I mean, it's just tiresome. The same references over and over again. Other than that, though, ladies, you're doing amazing. Let me know what you think of these Handmaid's Tale cosplayers in the comments, please. Especially the many women in my audience. I think my audience is actually like 51% female or a majority female. Do you not find this kind of ridiculous and over the top? Please do let me know. I want to hear from y'all. And do hit that like button and make sure to subscribe while you're at it. Now, we're going to talk about some extremely inflammatory comments a very prominent Democrat made that take a similar tone to these Handmaid's Tale cosplayers, but it's even more extreme coming from a very prominent Democratic elected official at one of these No Kings protests after this. American politics is descending into chaos, and it's harder than ever to know what's really happening. The only way to figure out what's actually going on is with Ground News, an amazing service I've used for years that helps me prepare this show. Ground News gathers news from all over the world in one place so you can see what both sides are saying and make up your own mind. It also shows you everything you need to know about a source's bias, factuality, and ownership. The recent protests and riots against immigration enforcement offer an important example of why Ground News is so necessary. Using Ground News, you can see how the left is portraying it, with articles like this one from Vox titled, "Immigration Raids Fuel Protests and Fear in Los Angeles." You can also see how right-wing media is covering it, with this Fox News headline reading, "Coast to Coast, Anti-ICE Chaos Caught on Camera." That's a really striking difference in narratives. And using Ground News, not only can you see how both sides are framing any given story, you can also get a neutral summary, see who's covering it and who's ignoring it, and most importantly, use your critical thinking skills to make up your own mind. You can get the same plan that I use, which is the Vantage subscription, if you sign up through my link, ground.news/Brad, or using the QR code on screen to get 40% off unlimited access, which comes out to about $5 a month. This exclusive discount is available now through this link, so act now to pop your media bubble and keep your critical thinking skills sharp. So you've probably heard of Eric Swalwell. He is a Democratic representative from California and a very prominent progressive political figure in this country. He's also known to engage in his fair share of hysteria and hyperbole, and his remarks at the No Kings protest was absolutely no exception. Because yes, guys, Democrats are still calling Trump Hitler. Take a listen to what he had to say.
Donald Trump is America's Hitler. That's not even what I have said about him. That's what his own vice president called him. His own vice president probably said the harshest words anyone in America has ever said about Donald Trump. No Democrat has even said that. But his own vice president called him America's Hitler. Well, he ain't proven us wrong in these first 150 days.
So much about this is so incredibly painfully cringe. First off, I love the idea that no Democrat has called Trump Hitler. Really, Eric? Where have you been the last decade? And in fact, in this very remarks, you just suggested that, yeah, he basically is Hitler. Now, I understand why Democrats want to highlight the fact that J.D. Vance, the vice president, used to be a big Trump critic. It is, not super convenient. It is a little bit awkward for the president. So, of course, you'd want to point that out if you're his political opponent. But he changed his mind. He's addressed it many times. He said he was wrong to say that. So at some point, we should probably stop beating the dead horse and bring up comments from like 10 years ago. But I get bringing that up. What I do find absurd, though, is Eric Swalwell and many other Democrats unironically suggesting that Trump is America's Hitler. He is not, in fact, seeking to put millions of people in death camps and exterminate anyone. And I really think people do this on both sides. They invoke alarmist rhetoric, I know, but there's a special penchant to do this, I think, from the Democratic side of the aisle when it comes to Trump and Hitler comparisons. I think it's profoundly disrespectful. I have many criticisms of him. I think he's overreached in a lot of ways so far this time around as president. But the idea that he is any way comparable to someone who murdered millions of people is just ridiculous. And I really do think it's offensive to the memories of the trauma of the death and the suffering that so many millions of Jewish people and other victims faced in the Holocaust and under Hitler, to so trivially invoke this just to slander your political opponents. I also think that we're living in a time where political violence is on the rise, and while you can't directly draw a line from one extremist remark to any act of violence, everyone, people on both sides, need to tone down the rhetoric, because we have people literally killing people on the other side. That's not something anyone should support, and everyone needs to tone down the hysteria and hyperbole, because all it takes is for one person out there to actually believe you that Trump is America's Hitler, even though he's obviously not, and go out and try to do something crazy. So I think elected officials left and right have a responsibility to not engage in this kind of extremist rhetoric given our current political climate. And that goes for some of the other things we saw at these protests, including protesters burning Trump in effigy, beating the crap out of Trump-shaped piñatas, and raging, even paying $5 to rage out and destroy Trump-shaped dolls. Yeah, this is not normal or healthy. And look, it can simultaneously be true that even these kinds of extreme gestures are First Amendment protected speech, and they do have the right to do this, even if it is, I think, very extreme and offensive to a lot of people. And I will defend their right to express themselves. But it can also be true that this is, I think, pretty irresponsible. Especially, I really hate to see them egging on kids to beat the crap out of Trump-shaped piñatas. We should not be teaching kids that it's funny or okay to hurt people you disagree with just because you strongly object to their opinions or views. That strikes me as terrible parenting. And I imagine many of these parents would agree if they saw, MAGA rally goers encouraging their kids to beat up Obama piñata. And I would agree, that's wrong. We shouldn't be doing that kind of thing, especially again in this current moment where so much political violence is happening. Gosh, I just hate to see this kind of thing. And I think it tars what was largely a very peaceful day of protests to have this kind of violent symbolism present in some of the displays. And I really think these parents involved and these random old people raging out on Trump-shaped dolls need to take a look in the mirror, perhaps seek some therapy or some counseling, and restrain themselves, because this is not a good look for them or for this movement. One other thing that struck me as absolutely insane. Randy Weingarten, the head of the nation's biggest teachers union, participated in this anti-Trump day of protests and made these remarks.
You are the community to this president's chaos. And together, we build a future of opportunity and justice for all. Hope over fear, aspiration over anger, the promise of America for each and every American. That is what we are fighting for today.
So set aside how you feel about Trump for a moment. I just think it's wildly inappropriate for a teachers union to be this openly political and its leaders to be obvious partisans. I mean, she was apparently had a role with the Democratic Party that she just resigned. How is anyone supposed to believe that these unions are neutrally advocating for what's best for teachers or are at all apolitical? How can anyone justify trying to force membership into obviously inherently political bodies like this? To me, it's kind of an aside, but it's a really remarkable indication of how partisan these institutions actually are, even though they claim to be totally apolitical and just representing the interests of teachers and fighting for what's best for students. I'm not buying that, and I think a lot of Americans have lost faith in teachers' unions. Not teachers, there's a big difference. I have so much respect for America's teachers, but I think a lot of Americans have lost faith in teachers' unions because of their role in fighting to keep schools closed in COVID and their politicization, like this kind of thing. To me, it just seems like a terrible way to lead an organization or advocate, but I guess they just can't help themselves, some of these folks. Now, I want to read you guys a Trump post about all the No Kings protests that sounds real, but actually was fake. He didn't actually post this, but it is funny, so I want to read it to you. A huge thank you to all the No Kings protesters yesterday. This fake Trump post from Truth Social reads, I was very concerned. A king was trying to take my place, but thanks to your tireless efforts, I am still your president. Great job, all. American flag emoji. I thought this was really funny, and for a moment I thought it was real, but I did check, and it's not actually anywhere on his Truth Social feed, so it's not real. It's not a real post as far as I can tell, but it is funny. Look, I think it's totally fair to criticize a lot of the things that Trump has done as president. I'm glad these protests were primarily peaceful and, very restrained compared to a lot of other protests we've seen in this country in recent years, but I do think some of the messaging falls flat, and I'm not sure long term what they accomplished, but people do have a right to express themselves. And aside from these few cringe-worthy moments that did go viral that I have some issue with, I'll always support their right to do that. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments, subscribe, yada, yada, yada. Remember to subscribe to my bonus channel, linked in the description, where I'm uploading exclusive content. Remember to check out my Your Delulu is Showing merch items and other cool stuff at the shop, linked in the description. And remember to send in your voice notes for my Voicemail Friday episodes, where I react to your woke horror stories and your personal life scenarios to give you my feedback and my advice. You can send one in at the link in the description. And now we're going to talk about something disturbing, which is the absolute fire hose of misinformation that very prominent MAGA influencers spread all over Twitter and X, including high-level politicians and people like Elon Musk, in the aftermath of the really horrifying attempted assassination and successful assassination of two Democratic state officials in Minnesota over the weekend. Now, in the aftermath of these incidents, there's always this temptation to jump to conclusions or to blame your political opponents or what have you, but I always think we should try to resist any such temptation, resist speculation, and wait for more facts and information to come out, because otherwise you end up saying things that are obviously untrue, believing social media rumors, and spreading false perceptions and panic among the public, which is what unfortunately far, far too many right-wing commentators did over this past weekend. Chief among them was Elon Musk, the owner of X, and until very recently, but maybe they've made up, a big Trump ally. He shared a post on X that read this: "The left kills the CEO of United Healthcare, kills two Israeli ambassadors' staffers, attempts twice to assassinate the president, doxes and attempts to murder federal ICE agents and police all week, and now kills an MN state rep and her husband and injures a senator and his wife. The left has become a full-blown domestic terrorist organization." Elon shared that tweet, which now has 53 million views, and said, "The far left is murderously violent." Now, if you guys are regular viewers of this show, you'll know that I've very much criticized what I see as far left support for political violence in things like the Luigi Mangione shooting and them thirsting for Luigi, memes that are jokes, but actually a lot of people do support assassination attempts against Trump and Musk. I've condemned all of that. But I don't think you can paint with this broad a brush and say that this is the left. It's a concerning percentage of people, but I don't think it's the left, and I don't think you can call them all a domestic terror organization just because some people support these actions, some of which weren't actually clearly committed by specifically left-wing individuals. But more importantly, it is totally irresponsible and reckless and just not true to suggest that in the aftermath of this incident, of the shooting of two Democratic officials, we somehow knew this was a far-left person that did the shooting. We did not know that, and I still think it's too soon to say final confirmations of everything, but the evidence that has come out in the days since has actually suggested that this person may have been more on the right wing politically, which of course doesn't mean all Republicans are at fault or anything like that. And I still want to see final proof, and I do think they need to release this person's manifesto. But the fact that he had tons of Democratic officials on his hit list that was discovered, the fact that he had pro-abortion organizations on this list, some of his past comments, what somebody who's claiming to be his roommate is coming out and saying, much of this suggests perhaps a right-wing political affiliation. But again, I think it's too early to conclusively say, and there's some questions to be asked about some of those things I just mentioned, which is why I don't jump to conclusions. But Elon and the random account that he promoted did jump to conclusions that were not substantiated, so far appear wrong, and yet he spread this misinformation to tens of millions of people. That is an absolutely reckless and abhorrent way to use your massive platform in the aftermath of a tragedy. And he wasn't the only one. There were many other right-wing voices who did this. Laura Loomer quote tweeted Tim Walz on a post where he honored the woman who was killed and said, "And your friend murdered her. Hopefully you are investigated." This is totally absurd. Not to mention just like nasty and hyperpartisan and tribal to like insult someone on a post where they're honoring the victim and imply they're somehow guilty. This guy was not Tim Walz's friend. In fact, Tim Walz was on his hit list of politicians he meant to target. Now, some of this confusion is stemming from the fact that the guy who is believed to be the shooter, who thankfully has been apprehended as of the time of this recording, was appointed to some board by Tim Walz. But this is not proof that he's left-wing. It's not proof that Tim Walz even knew him. Governors appoint random people to these perfunctory boards that are bipartisan. They have Democrats, Republicans, independents, hundreds of people all the time. As the Wall Street Journal reported, state records confirmed the alleged shooter's appointments to the governor's Workforce Development Board, first under Democratic Governor Mark Dayton and then by the current Democratic Governor Tim Walz. Governors appoint thousands of people of all parties to boards and commissions created by the legislature for unpaid roles. This particular board has about 60 people, including Republican and Democratic representatives from business, education, unions, and community groups. The alleged shooter is listed as no party preference on his board profile. Walz's office said it had no familiarity with the suspect. Now, of course, it is possible, I guess anything's possible, that Walz was secretly somehow buddies with this guy who was also plotting to kill him, but this board appointment is really not that consequential, doesn't tell us a whole lot about the guy's actual political affiliation, and certainly doesn't suggest that they were friends. So again, it is totally reckless to just throw this kind of misinformation around in the immediate aftermath of a truly horrifying incident. Another person who absolutely did this was Senator Mike Lee, the Republican from Utah, who I used to have a lot of respect for because he was a really strong conservative intellectual and constitutionalist, and even if I didn't always agree with his positions, I could always respect where he's coming from. Well, in recent years, he's descended into like a MAGA troll, and some of his posts are indistinguishable from the Laura Loomers of the world. He shared the chilling image of this shooter pretending to be a police officer and wearing a mask that I believe was captured by one of the victim's ring cams, and he tweeted, "This is what happens when Marxists don't get their way." Another post was shared where someone wrote, "Walz urges Democrats to be a little meaner, bully the shit out of Trump," to which Mike Lee replied, "These words don't go unnoticed." What on earth? What is he posting about? There is absolutely no evidence suggesting this guy was a Marxist, so it's gross and reckless to just cast fact-free aspersions, blaming your political opponents for a tragedy, and then is he suggesting, replying to this random person, a United States senator is suggesting that because the governor of Minnesota said we should bully Trump, he's to blame for a dude going and attempting to assassinate two Democratic state officials. The math is not mathing. And once again, incredibly reckless and disappointing from somebody who I used to admire and has now descended into Laura Loomer-esque levels of commentary. The far-right influencer Mike Cernovich shared a similarly just wild take on the tragedy. He wrote in a tweet that has 1.3 million views, Did Tim Walz activate an assassin against a political rival who voted against his plan to give illegal immigrants free health care? I'm sorry, everything about this is deranged. There's no evidence to support any of these claims. Some right-wing social media posts tried to connect this shooting to a vote about immigration and healthcare, but that doesn't make any sense. One of the victims voted for the policy, the other one voted against it. It wasn't about that. There's no tie to that. That's totally speculative and not true. And then to suggest that a governor activated an assassin with absolutely no evidence in the aftermath of a tragedy, when you are an influencer with millions of people who follow you, is just so incredibly reckless and so likely to contribute to future violence. If you're making people think that Mike Walz is hiring assassins and taking people out, they might be inspired to do something crazy against him. It's just totally reckless and reprehensible. I know I keep saying that over and over again, but I'm just struck by it all because a few years ago, the right wing would have had higher standards than this, but something has changed, something has shifted, and I'm just appalled by some of the stuff I'm seeing. It's really, really, really unacceptable in my view. But what do you guys think? Do let me know in the comments. Have you seen this kind of misinformation spreading like wildfire on social media? I want to hear from you in the comments. I do take the time to read the comments because I do really enjoy what you guys have to say. Please do make sure you're subscribed. Do hit that like button. Remember to check out the merch, subscribe to my second channel, send in your voice notes for Voicemail Friday, yada yada yada. And with that, we'll talk again real soon.